What's up, everybody? It's T. Welcome back to the Fab School channel. Today, we're going to be doing a deck tech for Azalea in the not quite so supported LSS format, Project Blue. If you haven't heard of Project Blue yet, I definitely think you should check it out. It's incredibly fun, and it's a new, interesting take on Flesh and Blood. Project Blue is played with Blitz heroes, so you have access to young heroes, and you're only allowed to play commons and rare cards. This includes your heroes. You play 2 copies of each card, and your deck with your arena and your deck is comprised of 55 cards. At the beginning of each game, you present 40 cards in your main deck plus your equipment, and the rest of the cards you just don't play. It's your sideboard. This format's been really interesting and really fun to think about and brew. If you know me, you know that I love brewing decks and figuring out what the bounds of the format are in whatever format I'm playing. Having access to this new format through Project Blue has felt like I have more tools to sculpt. It's like an unexplored world, and it's a lot different than Commoner, which is kind of how I initially thought the format would shape out, is that it would just be like an exact mirror of Commoner. But having access to the rares and the different ban list for Project Blue really changed things up in a way that I didn't expect. So before we get started on the Azalea deck tech, let's pop over to the ban list so that we can take a look at what's banned in this format. So these are the cards that are banned in Project Blue. As you can see, there's some very powerful equipment and some very notable cards for main deck, like Belittle, Count Your Blessings, Drone of Brutality. There's some things you would expect, but then as we get further down this list, you see Fate Foreseen, Flick Flack, Rootbound Carapace, Sink Below, Sigil of Solace. That's right. This format has taken out a lot of the staples that you typically see in any constructed format. Your defense reactions, your defensive tools, as well as some of the most powerful aggressive tools of all time through cards like Ball Lightning, Belittle, Electromagnetic Somersault, and some of the fatigue tools, such as Seeds of Agony that allows you to create a big stack, Drone of Brutality that helps you be the fatigue deck. And going back up to the equipment with that in mind now, you can see a lot of various gameplay styles in what's banned in the equipment. Now you might notice that of everything that's banned, the hero that stands out to me as not having been hit by any of these bans is Azalea. This was my first thought at looking at the format. Most of Azalea's power cards are rare pump spells, common pump spells, rare arrows, and common arrows. You still have access to Death Dealer, and Death Dealer is a very powerful mechanic innately by drawing a card to progress your game plan. So, that being said, let's take a look at this Azalea deck and how I made my take on the first Azalea list for Project Blue. Looking at the equipment, we have Wayfinder's Crest, which is a hat. Whenever you defend with it, you look at the top card of target hero's deck. You don't have access to Skullbone Crosswrap, the notoriously powerful headpiece in Azalea that allows you to know if you want to flip. So with Wayfinder's Crest, you have access once per game to being able to block with this and then see what your upcoming turn is going to look like. Whether or not you can afford to Azalea flip, if you want to find a line where you're activating Death Dealer or possibly popping Bullseye Bracers, you get to see what you want to be doing on your turn once per game. And while this format isn't necessarily as fast as most Blitz games, it's somewhere between a Blitz level of gameplay and a classic constructed level of gameplay. In most games that I've played, I feel like they've gone about 6 or 7 turn cycles, so not quite second cycle on the deck, even with it being 40 cards, but enough where you're going to have a couple of really powerful turns, and Wayfinder's Crest helps push those powerful turns. You get to see what's coming up. The obvious include of Death Dealer and Crow's Nest. Crow's Nest, honestly, I've never paid into it, and the resources in this deck are a little tight. It's possible that you could just cut this card and have an extra sideboard slot, but in every game that I've played so far, I haven't really felt that it's been necessary to have an additional sideboard slot. Bullseye Bracers is our best in slot for arms. This card is just insanely powerful. Being able to load an arrow if you draw an all red hand with like a 1-cost arrow or a 0-cost arrow, pairing it with Blossom of Spring is incredibly powerful. Alternatively, Blossom of Spring into Death Dealer is also really powerful, but Bullseye Bracers is another way to make some of those hands function if you do draw a hand that doesn't look like it's going to be the best. It also has the added bonus of having built-in Arcane Barrier, so it's less slots that you have to dedicate to your sideboard to be combating things that exist in the format, such as Icelander. Blossom of Spring is going to be your best in-slot chess piece from what I have found so far. This gives you the ability to activate Death Dealer for free, and then regardless of what you draw, if you load a 1-cost arrow by using Blossom of Spring and Death Dealer, you can just pitch whatever you draw in the Death Dealer to send it still, or you can pop Blossom of Spring, activate Death Dealer to load a 0-cost arrow, and then if it's another pump spell, you can play it, or if it's another arrow, you can just arsenal it, and then try for an Azalea flip next turn. That might be the turn that you use your hat and try to see what we're going to do with our hand. Blossom of Spring, very powerful in this list. And then these are the kind of generic equipment that you play in this format if you don't have another slot, if you don't have anything that's better in the slot. Blade Beckoner boots, or Blade Beckoner equipment in general, is very powerful. You always get at least one block out of it because of Guardwell. And if you play against a matchup like Azalea, you're only ever going to get one out of it because they're not going to swing with a weapon. But a lot of decks in the format are swinging with a weapon. So a lot of times this will just end up being 2 value in your boots, gain a couple life, help stop an on hit, something like that. So Blade Beckoner boots, very good. Let's look at the main core of the deck. It looks like a pretty generic Azalea shell, I think, because you're not really missing anything. The cards you're really missing are some of the Majestics, but even then, it just synergizes well together. You still have the ability to be looking at the top card a lot with Scout the Periphery and Read the Glide Path. And then some of your other pump spells just fill in as Nimblism, but a lot of them provide these relevant on hits that are doing something whenever they connect. You can use things like Take Aim to help fix some of those red hands that just reload an arrow and then either use the Blossom of Spring to swing a 1 or just play a 0, just like the same applications for Bullseye Bracers. Release Detention. It stops defense reactions from Arsenal, which isn't as big considering that there aren't as many in the format. But I still think it's possible that something like Springboard Somersault is very powerful in this format, being that it's just a 0 for 4 from Arsenal, but you have to put it in Arsenal to get it to be that number. So Release Detention could be something that's good. Overall, we just want the 0 for 3 pump spells, and we've got most of them in the deck. There's a couple that are situational that I don't like playing, but all the ones that are non-situational, give an arrow +3, are in the deck. We have the full rainbow of Bolton Shots. This card is incredibly powerful. Everything that I've played with this deck so far suggests to me that if something does end up needing to be banned from it, it would be Bolton Shot. The range of extension that you get out of Bolton Shot, especially in a format like this that's a little bit tight on going wide in some strategies, Bolton Shot helps you go over the edge to threaten your opponent to not know if they're supposed to be blocking or not. If you're able to pump a Bolton Shot and get it into your arsenal without using your bow, then you're always threatening your bow afterwards. Or if you did have to use the bow to load the Bolton Shot, you still have access to Bullseye Bracers to just load a thing or Take Aim to reload a thing. Bolton Shot going wide and giving the go again no matter what is just so good. The other arrow that we're playing a rainbow sweep of is Infecting Shot. This card has been really good. Obviously, the on-hit of Blood Rot is very powerful. There's a lot of aggro decks that exist in Project Blue from what we've seen so far, and Infecting Shot is punishing to those aggro decks because a lot of times it ends up being a 1-cost 7 because they're not going to be able to pay for the Blood Rot and they're not going to be able to block efficiently. So if you pair it with like a Lace with Blood Rot, then this becomes a 1-card 5, this becomes a 1-card 7. You just get this really good math against them. Drill Shot, not as relevant. Usually they'll just throw all the armor in front of this, but that means that they're not stopping a later on hit, which can also be relevant. Hamstring Shot to stop some of the aggressive decks. Sleep Dart to stop some of the text boxes on the decks where the hero text matters. Searing Shot for extra damage. A lot of times this card ends up just being a 0 for 5. Spire Sniping to help get you into more Azalea flips where you're often not being able to use Azalea in the best ways. And then read the glide path and scout the periphery can also help you figure out whether or not you should be activating Azalea. I don't like blind flipping in this deck. I'm a lot of times just only flipping if I know what the top card of my deck is. From the hat, from some look at the top card effect, or from Spire Sniping where I might get to manipulate it a little bit. You'll notice that we're very light on resource cards in this deck. We have the 2 Bolton shots, the 2 infecting shots in blue, and then the rest are yellows through Bolton Shot, Infecting Shot, and Spire Sniping. Doesn't seem like a lot of resource cards, but a lot of times you're just going to be using, keeping 1 resource card, pitching it. The most you'll spend in a turn is usually 2, and it'll be like, activate the bow, send a 1-cost arrow. If you have a blue, there are some situations where you're going to be activating the bow, looking at the top, flipping with Azalea, and then you can pay into a counter with the Crow's Nest, to try to get +1 on Infecting Shot or Piercing on Drill Shot. But a lot of times that's not going to be as relevant, which is why I was saying that you could probably get rid of the Crow's Nest if you really wanted an extra slot. Like I said, though, it just hasn't been that relevant. The sideboard of what you'll see below in the inventory has been the situational. If you notice, my main deck is actually only 38 cards. The inventory, I've just been picking whatever situational arrow is best for the matchup that I'm playing in that moment. So things like Enigma, I'll play Murkmire Grapnel. Salvage Shot is good. I've been playing this against anything that would normally fatigue Azalea in Classic Constructed. I'm not sure that's correct, but we're very early into the experimental phase of the format, and Salvage Shot with Dominate, if you can loop it in the end game with Azalea, if you are getting fatigued for whatever reason, is very powerful. You get to keep having the arrow in your deck so that you can keep going off. Sedation Shot for inertia, very powerful against decks like Icelander or other decks that want to set up an arsenal, a big go-wide turn. Sedation Shot just overall, the inertia token does matter a lot more than you think. I'm playing 1 Take Cover. It's one of the only 0-for-4 defense reactions that's left in the format. I think it's the only true 0-for-4. You still have things like Reduce to Rune Chant, but that's sometimes situational on being a 0-for-4. Take Cover is the only true 0-for-4 defensive reaction in the format. And I honestly don't even think it's that crazy good, because a lot of times we don't want to block. I've got this in here just in case something arises where you decide that you do need to be more defensive, but the slots in the sideboard haven't super mattered. I'm really happy with where the main board configuration is, and then I've just been slotting whatever arrows matter the most. Withering Shot is very good against the ninja decks that want to swing their Kodachis every time, or some of these decks that do weapons and arsenal setup like Rhinar. You can get 2 to 3 value out of this Withering Shot in a defensive manner to have an extra turn of being able to send another dominated arrow to close the game. The 2 or 3 life that you'll typically gain from Withering Shot in those matchups will give you that extra turn, because then they won't hit the break points that they need to be killing you a turn faster. We also have access to 2 more pieces of Arcane Barrier in the sideboard for the wizard matchups that present things like the 3 mana spell that if it's fused and it hits, you discard a card or pay 2. Having access to the Arcane Barrier prevents the blue ones of those from actively hurting you as much whenever you draw a blue in your hand. And if you draw a yellow in your hand, you can just use that, or a red, you might just discard and accept your fate on getting hit and discarding a card. So situationally, a lot of different things arise. The thing to note whenever we're looking at the main deck is that if it's a matchup that doesn't typically send attacks, I'll also take out the Hamstring Shot and then put in whatever arrow matters more. So against something like Icelander, I'm more keen on playing Salvage Shot and Sedation Shot and then cutting the Hamstring Shots. But 38, we're just picking 2 and then swapping these out potentially. Everything else pretty much stays the same. Like I said, I haven't found a matchup that I want to play the Take Cover in, so I really haven't been playing it, but it's in the list just to show it, because sometimes it might matter. The cards that we might play in the future in this deck, in my opinion, are more copies of Spire Sniping through the blues and reds, just to have more ways to look at the top and manipulate the top. If we need to be more defensive, we could play things like Take Cover and Reinforce the Line. If we decide that paying resources isn't going to be the best, then we could be playing some amount of Spellfray equipment The leggings is going to be my first slot that I want to put in the deck for that if I do decide to go that route. And then potentially deep blue if we need to be doing more one-costed pump spells, or activating the bow and sending a one-cost arrow more often. But so far, I have found that Blossom of Spring has really filled that slot pretty well. We've only had access to the knowledge of this format for a few days at the time of this recording, so there's nothing crazy for me to offer to you, but I have been playing a lot in our Project Blue Discord that we made, and you can see that I've played 17 games with this list, and I have lost one game to a Briar. Everything else has been victories. So if you like Azalea, I highly encourage you to check out Project Blue. It's a super cool format. It's a lot of fun, and there's so much brewing potential where you could be testing different decks and heroes that you haven't thought about in a while, maybe. Look at this matchup spread of like the different things that I've played against. There's heroes from every era of Flesh and Blood in this list, and it's super cheap to get into in paper. This might be a format that you could introduce to your LGS to help get more players into the game, being that it's so cheap and it still has these really fun gameplay, like the games play out in a very fun way still. It doesn't feel miserable like every game plays out the exact same, and there's so many different things to explore. So I highly implore you to check out Project Blue. I will leave a link in the description below for our Discord channel. You can join there, check out the format, play some games, check out some deck lists in the channel. We'd be happy to have you. And I really hope you check out this format and enjoy it as much as I do. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Class dismissed.